I'm now delighted to welcome you all to our annual NFUS debate, which is always a highlight of AgriScot event. It gives me great pleasure, and I would like to introduce our Cabinet Secretary for Rural Economy and Tourism, Mr. Fergus Ewing. Fergus, the stage is yours.
Well, thank you very much indeed, Robert, and good afternoon, everybody. It's a real shame that we can't meet in person at AgriScot, which is, I think, for myself and you all, one of the absolute highlights of the farming calendar, an institution in Scotland. But thank you very much, Robert, Claire, and your team for arranging this digital event. Obviously, throughout this pandemic, we've gone through difficulties, human and economic, that we haven't encountered for a long time, perhaps ever in our lifetimes. But I'm very proud of the fact that the farming community has put food on the plate for people throughout these islands over all of that period and worked hard, in many cases even harder than in peacetime, as it were. There's many things that we miss getting together at AgriScot, getting together at the Royal Highland and at other events, shows. I myself, my family have missed going to Nairn and Granton Show, which we've attended for most of the years in the last decades. But nonetheless, the industry has carried on despite the solitary working and the isolation that can be involved. And I'd like to pay tribute to the work that our SABI does for helping those farmers and their families who need a bit more support. And I would urge you, if you're not already supporting by way of membership our SABI, that you do so. It's money well spent. Auction and livestock marts have operated differently this year, responding to the COVID challenge, and I want to thank you for doing that. And also in particular, there were real concerns early on in the year about fruit and veg, about workforce issues, and I'd like to pay tribute to the work that farmers in that sector have carried out with the full support throughout of my friend and colleague Marie Goujon, the Rural Affairs Minister. So growers have not only provided work for people from home and abroad, but also kept the supply of Scottish fresh fruit and veg going. It needs scarcely be said that the responsibility rests with all of us not to let our guard down. I read this morning in the newspaper report of a certain town in Ayrshire where 17 people attended a house party. That led to spread of the infection in that area. It's just one wee example, but I think it just illustrates how important our own personal contribution by observing the rules is. This year's payment performance has, I think, been impressive, and I wanted to start off by paying tribute to the people that work in the RPID offices throughout the country and at Saughton House for working hard, and despite working from home, their performance has, if anything, even improved. So they've risen to the challenge, and this year I was, of course, determined to make sure that farmers and crofters and land managers get support payments on time. That's extremely important to me and has been for the last 4 years. I'm pleased to say that thanks to those hard-working staff, we had not only paid out all of the 219 CAP Pillar 1 payments on time, but we did it in the earliest ever date during this CAP. We also met the new requirement to make over 95% of Pillar 2 payments by the EU deadline of the 25th of June. The SAF window was opened on time and closed on time on the 15th of May. There was no need for an extension. And once again, ladies and gentlemen, Scotland was the first UK paying agency to make advance payments. They're called loans, but in effect they're almost always simply advance payments available this year. Over 13,600 loan payments were made worth £336 million, and they were paid starting early in September, the earliest ever, 2 months ahead of some other parts in the UK. To allow us to start making the BPS payments in December, and for most of you that would be the remainder of the payment after deduction of the advance payment that you've already received. This year's loan scheme will close on the 30th of November. So any of you there who haven't applied for a loan and wish to do so, this is, if you like, a final opportunity, because it must be closed to allow us to move on to the next period of work. So I just do want to pay a sincere tribute to all of those in the ARPID teams in 17 area offices working seamlessly to help provide the payments, which after all you earn. Challenges ahead. I wanted to touch, Robert, on some of these swiftly. Avian flu, we did act quickly to an increase in threat from a more severe strain of avian flu from migrating birds travelling to the UK from Western Europe by declaring an avian influenza prevention zone and temporarily banning all bird gatherings across all Scotland. This means it's now a legal requirement for all bird keepers to follow strict biosecurity measures outlined within the prevention zone declaration. And this decision follows the latest scientific and veterinary advice, and it was taken in close collaboration with other GB administrations who have also introduced similar measures. I wanted to mention Brexit, which looms over us all with many unknowns. We don't yet know the terms of a deal or whether there will be a deal. We know that exporting key food products will be more bureaucratic, but we don't know if they will face tariffs in addition to non-tariff issues. Tariffs are a real concern, particularly for sectors like the lamb sector, where the exports to continental Europe are of such value. And I want to let you know that we have been pressing hard on the UK government to prepare a compensation scheme should that be required. That work was done before, and it was revived at my behest through the interministerial meetings, the meetings I have with George Eustace and my colleagues Leslie Griffiths and Edwin Poots from Wales and Northern Ireland respectively. I wanted to talk about the rural payment strategy. As I announced in Holyrood last week, we've published our strategy for 220 with the details of what that means in practice. We aim to improve in 219. Processing of 220 claims has been ARPID's priority since July, and we intend to deliver BPS, greening and young farmer payments at volume in December 220, 2 months earlier than 219. We intend that the Suppler Beef Support and SUS, the sheep scheme, the Upland Sheep Support Scheme, will commence in April and May respectively. That's April for beef and SUS in May, matching last year's performance. For LFAS, it's intended that the LFAS payments will commence at volume in January 2021. Under the other Pillar 2 schemes, payments for the existing contracts under the Agri-Environment Climate Scheme, Forestry Grant Scheme and Rural Priorities are proposed to commence from March 2021, again earlier than last year. So I'm pleased to report this progress, and we are working hard to deliver to that schedule as we did last year. I want to talk a bit about the future. We have to go on for planning for the future, despite the COVID and Brexit difficulties that we face. In 2018, I promised Scotland's farmers and crofters a period not only of stability, but of simplification between 221 and 224. And I remain fully committed to those in our most remote and fragile communities and supporting them with continuation of LFAS. Earlier this month, I announced that LFAS would not only continue in 221, but the payment rates would increase back to 100% of the 218 rate, firmly delivering the commitments that I've made to those in our LFA. Work to deliver this is underway, and last week we laid regulations before Parliament to enable us to make necessary simplifications to the CAP that you have called for many years. And I wanted to touch on two of these, firstly inspections and secondly penalties. I have been clear that the inspection and penalty regime is wholly unacceptable. Views from many of you, supported by the Simplification Task Force, have led me to take action. Specifically, on inspections, we intend to reduce the number of businesses subject to inspection from 5% to 3%, whilst promoting industry-wide benefits of continuing to demonstrate compliance. Based on 2019 data, we expect that the number of farm and croft visits for land inspections will be reduced from 1,076 to approximately 720, a reduction of 354, and where appropriate, we also seek to avoid making unannounced inspections, which I think can cause issues. And I would remind businesses that they can have a layperson attend the inspection should they so wish. On penalties, I can announce that we've got a revised approach for cross-compliance penalties from 2021. This aims to extend and improve guidance and education in relation to cross-compliance measures. Firstly, with the increased use of warning letters for first-time breaches discovered at inspection. So instead of going straight to the imposition of a penalty, there's a warning letter, an opportunity to put things right. I think that's fair. And secondly, by reducing percentage penalty levels for many of the remaining breaches. It's true that we will retain financial penalties for some, but I hope that everyone appreciates that we do need to retain financial disincentives to help protect the industry from the tiny minority who continue to breach in serious ways animal welfare regulations, animal identification, traceability, or environmental protections. Breaches that do, where they occur, and very rarely, where they do occur, they risk the reputation of the industry as a whole. I also confirm that for voluntary coupled support schemes, we will remove penalty levels 3, 4 and 5, simplifying the system and removing much of the disproportionate impact that these penalties have had. These changes, Robert, we have discussed informally with the National Farmers Union for Scotland, and I believe that they broadly have been welcomed, although Andrews is more than capable of speaking for himself. I do want to assure you that these are just the start of changes. I would like personally to go further if we can, but these changes are a start and I want to see how they operate in practice, but I do hope that they will be broadly welcomed. Robert, I wanted to talk about the future and climate change and sustainable farming. We are planning long-term changes to make farming and food production in Scotland more sustainable. This has never been more important. We now have Scotland-wide emissions targets in law, reducing emissions by 75% by 2030, that's compared with the baseline 1990, and to net zero by 2045. These are very challenging targets indeed. My colleague Rosanna Cunningham leads the work on delivering the climate change commitments through a revised plan to be published later this year. The plan will require us all to make changes to tackle climate change, and agriculture is no exception. But I know that you don't want to wait for another plan before starting the work of making the changes necessary to reduce emissions. That's why in this year's programme for government, we committed to establishing farmer-led groups to provide information, advice and proposals to cut emissions and tackle climate change for their sectors. It makes sense to start with the beef sector, given their higher emission contributions. I was delighted that the Suckler Beef Climate Group, chaired by Jim Walker and assisted by Claire Simonetta, reported a few weeks ago with strong recommendations on how to adapt our suckler beef herd to a low carbon future. That's both productive and profitable. Responses to the report that I've seen have been very positive across the whole agricultural industry. Robert, we now need to drive this forward at pace. Therefore, today I'm announcing that a programme board, which will be co-chaired by myself and Jim Walker, will begin work next week. It will meet first on the 26th November. It will meet again in December. It will aim to determine how best to take forward the recommendations that he produced in his and Claire Simonetta's report, with the aim of reporting early next year, as well as having representatives from the Scottish Government, NFU, that's formerly known as SNH, the SRUC and QMS. Other members of the board will be Claire Simonetta and Pat Lambert from the farming sector, Scott Walker from NFUS, Andy McGowan from Sam W and Neil Wilson from the IAAS, Tim Bailey and Bob Yule from SAOS and Scott EID will also be on the board. This is a very much an innovative group, a group of people with vast experience, knowledge and expertise between them. I look forward to continuing to work with Jim and the board in this area, and I'm extremely enthusiastic about this. I think this is the way forward. And I hope, Robert, and I expect that having a group that is led by experienced farmers of your own will give you confidence that the recommendations and proposals that it comes up with in advising the Scottish Government will be those which are practical, pragmatic, but also tackle the climate change, the real need to reduce emissions, and to drive forward food production and environmental stewardship hand in hand, so that we can aspire to be the best in the world, not only for the quality of our food, but also the standard of our environmental stewardship. I think that's a fine vision, and one that builds on our existing strengths, but allows us to go even further. Last week, I saw the release of the report from the Farming for 1.5 Degrees inquiry. The Suckler Beef report recommendations are consistent with the 1.5 Degrees report, particularly in relation to technical efficiency and conditionality for the sector. This emphasises why it's so important to take the beef report forward and learn by doing. I'm also pleased today, Robert, very pleased, delighted in fact, to announce that Andrew Moyer has agreed to chair an arable sector group building on the work of the Suckler Beef Group. Andrew's group will be asked to identify measures which support the arable and cropping sectors to contribute to climate change targets. Andrew, as a former chair of AgriScot, will be well known to you all and brings huge experience and knowledge to the role, both as a farmer, the chair of the Scottish Voluntary Initiative, and the chair of Scottish Quality Crops. And Andrew and I have spoken already about arable farmers being part of the solution in meeting ambitious climate change targets. I know he's champing at the bit to identify practical solutions, and I look forward to seeing these outputs in due course. In conclusion, Robert, I know that farming is facing a number of challenges at the current time, but I also am acutely aware that as a group of people in Scotland, you are extremely resilient and well able to find solutions to all of these issues and problems. And that's why I'm working with you, with these farmer-led groups, to ensure that agriculture's future is in your hands, working as a team with the Scottish Government and the public agencies. There's absolutely no doubt that this COVID crisis has taught us that we cannot take food security for granted. We must remain a country that produces food, high quality food, but increasingly we must do so to high environmental standards. And I believe that combining those two aims, those twin objectives together in Scotland, will help us overcome all the difficulties and establish a clear and bright future for Scottish agriculture over the next years ahead. So I'm delighted to be with you, Robert, today, and look forward to very much to hearing what Andrew has to say, and also, if the opportunity arises, answering any questions that members of your audience have today. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you, Cabinet Secretary, for that very informative speech. I would now like to introduce the President of the National Farmers Union, Mr. Andrew McCormick, to take the stage.
Thank you, Robert. And thank you, Cabinet Secretary, for some of those welcome announcements that you've made there. This is a most unusual time for anyone to hold office. We're dealing with Brexit, climate change, trade agreements, 2 agriculture bills, and all under the dark cloud that is this insidious COVID pandemic. There needs to be a lot of heavy lifting done, and there's a very short time to do it in. There are 3 significant challenges facing us which we cannot escape or hide from. We're living in and battling with a global pandemic that can have and has had for some fatal consequences. We're in a declared climate change emergency. Our economy and economic planning has been shot to hell. These are not mutually exclusive, and I believe we're not giving enough focus to the economy, which should be treated as an emergency. We need to sustain output, profitable output, as the foundation for the future. By driving more on the economy, we'd be able to reverse or grow away from the ongoing damage of COVID-19 and deliver stronger and better outcomes for the climate and our other national treasures like the food industry and public services. I'm harping back to that old chestnut. It's hard to go green when you're in the red. Our industry wants to take up the challenge. Look at the heavily oversubscribed applications for the Capital Grant Scheme. First £10 million from the 40 million of the Agricultural Transformation Fund announced by the Cabinet Secretary at our AGM in February this year for delivery in this financial year. We need to see significantly more and better transformational opportunities with this farming fund. There are many early adopters and entrepreneurs that need to be able to access these funds as leaders of the industry, and it should not just be a case of trying to pull the rest up. We as farmers and crofters can and will deliver for the economy, for the environment, for climate change, for biodiversity and our communities, but we need a much clearer steerer than that which the Capital Grant Scheme has offered. We need real tools with real purpose within a future agricultural policy preferably. The Scottish Government has set challenging targets. Cabinet Secretary has alluded to them on climate change for 2030, and we have the same ambition for food and drink for 30 billion by 2030, which in themselves are admirable, but they're absolutely useless unless we see how. Where is the policy? Where is the roadmap? Recently, even the Committee on Climate Change has reported that Scotland is lacking in policy to deliver on ambitious climate change targets. Cabinet Secretary and Scottish Government's desk must be buckling under the weight of all their commissioned reports and stakeholder input, promoting policy and a way forward. Tomes are really good, forward-looking and ambitious work. This goes as far back as Brian Puck's report, through the Agricultural Champions, Rural Advisors, Griggs, and so on up to the most recent Farming for 1.5. There are even more in the pipeline, and I'm pleased to hear the announcement on the Arable Sector Climate Group coming forward in the chairmanship, Andrew Moore. I'm sure he'll do an admirable job for us. I'm still, though, anxiously waiting on the upland and dairy sector reports starting that were also promised at the time of the announcement of the Circular Climate Change Board work last year, which is now reported, as the Cabinet Secretary has alluded to. Within this, our own excellent NFUS change document sits, the most recent being Stability, the Platform for Change in March. The Scottish Government has its own Stability and Simplicity document, which is a welcome holding position through to 2024. But this gives us from 2024 only 6 years to turn a behemoth industry with disparate arms and legs round. There have been 2 agricultural bills, one in Scotland and one for the UK, both having relevance to our future. In Scotland, we are now in a place with this enabling bill where support can be paid from transitioning ending on the 31st of December, having left Europe in January this year. It also creates the opportunity to develop and pilot future schemes, which a Cabinet Secretary is keen to deliver, and has said it there today, that will be more aligned to what Scotland needs, rather than being influenced by production from the Arctic Circle to the Mediterranean. The announcements we've had today from the Cabinet Secretary, I'm particularly pleased to see that we're going to be moving forward in the climate for the arable sector. But the 3-crop rule has also has made differences for us there. The announcements on the less favoured area, I really appreciate that from the industry, but that's from 2021. And now he's setting up this new board trying to promote and forward deliver on suckler beef groups. Really good stuff. Within the UK bill, there's clauses written in it that will actually help to support and deliver on the food security that we've been asking for, and it's going to be monitored for every 3 years. And we've also getting guarantees written into that we will not be undermined by lower standards on imports. As farmers and crofters, we will be affected by trade going forward. And our market will be shaped both for our inputs and our outputs by whatever trade deals are done, as the UK negotiates them, whether with Europe and or the rest of the world. Change is coming. The tariff schedule produced in May, again the Cabinet Secretary has mentioned these tariffs this year, should there be no EU-UK deal, which NFU have always said was the worst case scenario, will be used as a position to trade with the rest of the world, and it will have significant implications for our industry. Even with a deal with Europe, there will be friction. including damaging implications in the crucial free movement of people. There will be additional compliance and certification cost added, inconvenience, and almost certainly unforeseen challenges till we get to a new place in the world. We should, as all other businesses are, prepare for change from the 1st of January. It will not be easy, but we should be looking for opportunities, which is what an entrepreneurial business would do. However, in cases of market failure, the Treasury should step in, and NFU Scotland have been lobbying the UK government specifically on this issue constantly, and again highlighted it this week. To paraphrase Charles Darwin, it's those most willing or able to adapt that will thrive. Primarily, though, we must see strong policy direction from our Scottish Government, sooner rather than later. The gap between now and 2024 should be used to develop and deliver a significant and meaningful new agricultural policy, which the industry can get behind and deliver on. There's an additional £50 million a pot of money from the Lord Bew Review, and it should be used to get pilots onto the table and trialled. And hopefully the Cabinet Secretary can start promoting that. Financial support for this transformation is paramount, but funding should not be an excuse for Scottish Government not delivering an essential new agricultural policy. It can be scaled up or down, depending on the level of Treasury support beyond the current promises going to the end of this UK Parliament. Scottish Government are committed already to a significant policy, which will have massive implications for rural Scotland. The implementation of regional land use partnerships. Regional land use partnerships got a good airing at our autumn conference, and the First Minister has even mentioned in the programme for government that it would be rolled out in 2021, hopefully only as a pilot. Our conference highlighted massive gaps that are in the proposal when the floor opened to questions. Where and what is the national strategy that the regional partnerships are going to be steered by? When will we see the land use strategy that will shape this national strategy? Where is the funding coming from to implement this? Who are the people that are going to populate the panels in the regional land use strategies? And who will appoint them, elect them, select them? What role are land managers going to be given in shaping this? We are custodians of almost 80% of the land in Scotland, and are best able to understand what on the ground things can and need to be done to deliver on both the economy and environment, including climate change and biodiversity. What and how many regions are there going to be, and who will administer them? It feels to me like a whole new tier of bureaucracy is in the making, and it is being built in sand. If the plan is to use local administrative authorities, what competence and resource do they have to even add this to the beleaguered staffing budgets? What role has Rural Payments and Inspections Directorate to play in this agenda? They have decades of experience in land use and are already regionalised. It seems wholly incongruous that a government that has actively centralised organisations like the police and the fire service seem to want to distance themselves from delivering on such massive priorities as climate change and the economy, with as yet non-existent and only theoretical bodies such as regional land use partnerships. Many of our members left our conference in a mood of despair at what they hadn't heard. I urge government not to make the same mistake that was made with the beef efficiency scheme and rush out a programme and try to develop it on the hoof. If you're going to do this, take your time and do it right, or you could be doing rural Scotland a massive disservice. What rural Scotland really needs now is a belief in the future for their industry from Scottish Government. Scottish Government should be delivering a credible and workable agricultural policy that will strengthen the economy, deal with climate change, biodiversity, and our joint ambitions on the best food and drink in the world by 2030. All the information is sitting waiting on Scottish Government desks to be pulled together. Please stop dithering and start delivering. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Andrew. A very thought-provoking speech there. I would now like to open the floor up for questions, but before we do that, I have got a question here set out for the delegates who are watching in today. And So we're going to do an online poll just for a bit of fun. And the question you're going to see on your screen is, looking ahead to the future of farming, how would you vote now in the event of another Brexit referendum? Options: leave, remain, or undecided. The poll will now be open, and I will give you the results at the end of the questions and answers session. So to start off the questions, I've got a question here. They're flooding in the questions, so keep them coming in. But unfortunately, we haven't got a lot of time to get through a lot, I would suggest. But I've got a question here from Jean Anderson, and the question is to both of you. Now that Brexit is nearly here, can the Scottish Government guarantee that we will support systems in Scotland that reflect the problems of harsh weather, rough terrain, poor soil fertility that many Scottish farmers have to deal with in their daily lives? Surely now we could have a tailor-made, straightforward system to suit agriculture in Scotland. Cabinet Secretary, would you like to go first?
Well, I think the answer is yes. I mean, I'm determined to support, continue to support farming in Scotland in general, but in particular, those of you who are farming in most difficult areas, which I think was the nature of the question. So the answer to the first bit is yes. Can that scheme ever be simple and straightforward? I'm afraid the answer to that, to be brutally honest, is no. But there is the opportunity to come up with a scheme that is better target those who most need. I'm also personally committed to continuing to support farmers on the basis that you earn these payments. I've never regarded them as subsidies. I think they're earned income. And in fact, I talk to my officials that these are your wages. You produce food, you look after the countryside, and you support rural communities. These are three things which are of immense value to Scotland and for which you work hard. Therefore, I do believe that although in future we need to aspire to environmental targets, Robert, and there will need to be conditionality attached to continuing the payments, that there should continue to be direct income payments as opposed to ad hoc payments for environmental schemes. And the statistics show that without that income, without that support that we've come to expect from the EU to be here forever, that 2/3 of farms would make a loss. And that's unsustainable. So the answer is yes, the opportunity is there. And I've set out my vision today about how farmer-led groups working with government can lead us towards the best policy. And I'm determined that we will deliver that. And to respond to Andrew's challenge, we will get on with it. That's why I've set up the boards. That's why we're having 2 meetings before Christmas. That's why Jim and I will report probably around February next year. And that's why we'll go into the Scottish elections armed with a plan that will be, I think, the focus of debate in that election and put the future of farming and food production right up there at the top of the agenda.
Andrew, would you like to comment?
I'm basically in the same place as the Cabinet Secretary. I think there will be a stability payment. If you look at the change documents that have come out from NFU Scotland, we've always had it underpinned with stability payment, but equally, and again it's in our documents, we should be taking account of the environmental challenges as well. And I do believe that we need food production to be way up there as part of it. It's part of my belief in the economy. The food helps to drive the economy as much as anything else. If we're delivering on that, we'll be delivering an awful lot. 36,000 people employed directly, 63,000 indirectly. It's got to be a good thing to be making work.
Okay, next question from Clive Phillips. Looking for a bit of assurance from the sheep sector from both ScotGov and NFUS. That is not forgotten cousin caught between tree planting and initiatives for the beef sector. Something more progressive than adverse tariff compensations. Cabinet Secretary.
Yes, I think it's an extremely fair comment, and totally in support of the sheep sector. We work closely with colleagues in the National Sheep Association, meeting them regularly, as indeed we do the NFUS and other representatives. And I do think our high quality Scotch lamb is a mark of quality that will serve us well in the future. Continue with the recognition of PGI, something that hasn't yet been determined. But I do see the future very positively, and I would want to make sure that the sheep sector and all sectors, as well as the dairy sector, as Andrew has mentioned, the fruit and veg and pig sector, will all have their plan to combine efficiency and productivity and innovation with high environmental standards. So the plan is to make sure that every sector of the Scottish agricultural panoply has an equivalent piece of work and recognition that the beef sector has done. It started off with Jim Walker simply because the beef sector is associated with the biggest impact environmentally. That was the sole reason why we focused on the beef sector first. Not, Robert, because we prefer one sector to the other. They're all part of Scottish farming, and they're all valued partners of food production in Scotland.
Andrew?
Thank you, Robert. I think I'll come in behind and agree. I think we should be looking at this a lot more holistically. We can't see each sector separately, and I certainly don't believe that the sheep sector is any Cinderella. It looks to be a separate part of it. But the sheep sector have a very, very important role, and I'd like to point out that the St Andrew's Day is a great reason to have a celebratory piece of lamb, for no reason other than that. But the sheep sector cannot be left at the sidelines in this. We've got to keep developing it. We've got to keep working with it. There's a real place for our sheep market. I'm not a big fan of blanket forestry, but I think looking forward as part of the climate change challenge, and I think this is maybe what Clive was hinting at, there's a place for agroforestry. There's places for trees on farms that we could be using to help in the climate change as well. But certainly, if he was meaning blanket forestry, I'm certainly on the same page as him. I don't believe in that at all.
Thank you. Next question from Abby Kay of the Farmers Guardian to Fergus Ewing. If the UK ends up leaving the EU with a no deal, what compensation will the Scottish Government be seeking from the UK Government, if any, for Scottish farmers?
Well, thanks to Abby and the Farmers Guardian for that question. It's a very important question. And first of all, I very much hope we will avoid this scenario. My experience of compensation schemes is that they tend to be too little, too late, and far better to continue with the successful market and trade that we've carried on for many years. But if that situation does arise, Robert, and the real risk is a no deal and tariffs, which I think are in the region of 40 to 50%, then the risk is that that causes Scotch lamb to be displaced by European alternatives that don't have the tariff. And we can be undermined, undercut, and lose some or all of that market. So over the past, 3-4 years, I've been putting this point to George Eustace and indeed his 3 predecessors, because I'm actually on my 4th, or is it 5th farming minister now, and get on fine with George. And I think it is common ground that there does need to be a scheme, Robert. So I would assure those involved in the lamb sector that there is a recognition that this is required. The devil is always in the detail, and I have had detailed discussions with Andrew, with the NSA and others about the type of scheme, and there are two main different types of scheme. But at my instigation at the meetings with George Eustace, this has been on the agenda at my behest, and we have pressed the UK, and I'm confident that there would be a scheme. I do hope that we don't actually need one.
Okay,
Robert,
sorry, Andrew, would you like to comment?
No, totally. I think there's 2 elements to this: short-term view and a long-term view. In the short term, if there's market failure, we've got to get an instant reaction from Westminster, from the Treasury, to ensure we don't lose our industry. But we need to have some long-term plan in place to make sure that the actual industry, any part of it, is not lost. Because again, it's going back to what I'm saying about the economy. It's about what we're doing for climate change. We need to make this work.
Okay, we've got a question here from Lewis Butland. We need to know when the Agri-Environment Climate Scheme is going to be open and how long for. The application window is too small to allow farmers to design a scheme that is right for their business. We need to have assurance of how long the scheme is going to be available for. Cabinet Secretary.
Well, I was having discussions with officials about this morning, and will be for much of the remainder of this week. The main difficulty that faces us, Robert, is very, very simple. That we haven't had from the UK government financial commitments of a binding nature that enable us to be certain that there would be funding available for any future AICS scheme. Just at the moment, things do not look extremely optimistic in that regard. We are making our views known in no uncertain terms, and I have done so, to the UK government, that the promise that was made during the Brexit vote, the referendum, was that the EU funding would be matched, and that wasn't a qualified commitment. I mean, the EU funding covers Pillar 1, Pillar 2, it covers things like forestry, leader, AICS, land priority management. It covers a whole plethora of schemes. The risk, I fear, is that the upshot may not allow us sufficient funding to do everything. And therefore, we are working hard looking at the issue of the AICS scheme at the moment, but we do need to focus on whether, before we press the button on any scheme, whether we can afford to fund it. And that is the primary reason why no announcement has been made as yet. And the second point I make is this, that those of you who've read the Walker-Simonetta report will have seen that many of the recommendations in that report can be applied to all types of farming, not simply beef. And it will be the case that additional work will be required for many farms in order to demonstrate relatively simple matters such as carbon audit, but also more detailed information and data about farms. I think this work needs to be funded. I don't think we can just say to farmers, you've got to pay for this. And therefore, there has been a recognition that this work, which will be required, Robert, to meet the climate change aspirations that I mentioned, and it will probably be required across the board, is the kind of work that could be part of a revised AICS scheme. And that's one of the reasons why, as I say, we've been moving at pace to take forward the Walker-Simonetta report to a programme board. But I can assure you, and I hope that I've persuaded Lewis, that this is something we're working on very hard at the moment, and I very much hope that the UK will deliver its promise to match the EU money which was available not just over a year-to-year budgetary basis, but on a 7-year programme basis, which had the benefit of allowing future financial planning, especially for environmental schemes, which tend not to be a single-year scheme, but tend to be a multi-year scheme. So I hope that we can give clarity on this sooner rather than later, but the funding is the key issue.
Andrew, would you like to comment?
I think we need to keep some form of continuity in AICS in some way or another. But I recognise what the Cabinet Secretary is saying. We need to get the funding in place to make this happen. And I genuinely we'll be challenging Westminster at any opportunity if there's any thought of the funding that was promised for 2016, 2017,
Okay.
2019 not appearing.
We're getting tight for time and there's lots of questions coming in, but one question that has been very topical is for Cabinet Secretary, timelines, money in the capital grant scheme. You haven't really mentioned any of that. Is there any timeframes out there? Our English cousins, sisters, brothers application window closed on the 4th of November, and I think everybody is concerned that they get their results before we do, and there will be a supply issue for kit on farm if they get the leg up before Scotland does. Cabinet Secretary, to you.
Yes, well, obviously the scheme was popular in Scotland. It closed to applications on the 11th of October. 3,500 applications were received, Robert, which are being assessed. Successful applicants will receive their offers of grant in the next few weeks. I have to say, not all applications received will be successful. For example, some will be rejected as there's no justification for the purchase. And applications have been received for a wide range of eligibility, from items of £250 up to £25,000. Grants are based on standard costs, with the maximum amount a single farm business can receive limited to £20,000 to be claimed by the end of the financial year 2021. I expect to make an announcement very shortly on this. I recognise that timing is important, as the questioners state, and therefore it's extremely important that we get this information out as soon as possible. But the approach I'm taking, Robert, is not a restrictive approach. I want as many people to benefit as possible. That's the approach I'm taking, and we hope to make an announcement very shortly.
Good, thank you. A quick one, I don't know if you can have a quick answer, please. This one's come from Gordon Davidson at the Scottish Farmer. Would the panel comment on George Eustace's suggestion that sheep farmers affected by Brexit market disruption could switch to beef production instead? He obviously doesn't know Scotland very well.
I'll take it first. That's absolute nonsense, Robert. We can't accept that. I don't know where he was coming from or what he was thinking. It's just not appropriate to make a statement like that. He doesn't understand the Scottish Hills.
Cabinet Secretary?
Well, you know, it's funny. George Eustace is the farmer, right? And I'm the Glasgow lawyer. I don't think I would have ever offered that suggestion, because I know that you just don't really see Aberdeen Angus running up and down Ben Nevis very often, do you? You know, but to be fair, and you know, in George's defence, I did actually pull his leg a bit on Monday at the meeting we had by Zoom, and asked why he said this, and he did backtrack at the pace of Usain Bolt, I have to say. It was almost visible, the backtracking. And what he said was that he was misquoted, and he didn't mean that at all. He was really referring to mixed livestock farms could have more beef than they do at the moment. So there we are. I'm not posing as George Eustace's spin doctor here, but to be fair to him, maybe he was misquoted, but certainly he did seem a little bit embarrassed about it.
Right, we're seriously running out of time. The next session starts at 1 o'clock with the Dairy Hub. But yet again, thank you to both of you for being willing to come to our seminar today. Fingers crossed we will get back to some normality next year and get a live event, because this connectivity is really testing our patience this morning, trying to do this. For everybody out there, we have got 1,200 delegates signed in at the moment, which I think it's the amount of people that are interested and looking at this online is causing some issues. Andrew, thank you very much for your input. This is your 4th AgriScot. You're bowing out in February. So from everybody at AgriScot, thank you very much for everything you have done and contributed to our event for the last 4 years. And we will certainly look forward to your predecessor and being able to work with him. So we wish you all the best, whatever challenges you face next. Fergus, Cabinet Secretary, again, thank you very much for your honesty, being open, and your thoughts for going forward to keep Scottish agriculture on the map. 1,076 inspections, you're going to drop that to 720 next year, reduction of 324. Could I ask maybe that you put our farm on the 324 list, if that's at all possible? That would be appreciated. But you've covered a lot of topics, and I'm pleased to see that my predecessor, Andrew, is going to chair an arable group. I've got every faith in yourself and Jim for sorting out the climate change and beef sector. So let's onwards and upwards, and let's fly the Scottish flag. So really, that's all I've got to say. But thank you all very much. And unfortunately, we don't seem to have the poll results in, but we will come back with them later and put them out in some sort of forum for everybody by the end of the day. So thank you very much for all taking part, and hopefully see you next year in the Highland Hall. Welcome back, everybody. The poll question was, looking ahead to the future of farming, how would you vote now in the event of another Brexit referendum? 75% in Scotland said remain, 20% are leaving, and 6% undecided. So that's the stats on the wall at the moment. And I would just like to hand over to Claire, who is going to introduce the next seminar on the main stage.